So one of the first questions that we got was for Alan and Kara, and the question was, what are the implications of your research for state education agencies to build capacity at local education agencies for evidence diffusion and uptake?
So I'll take the first part of it, and then the other half of my brain can take the other part and correct all the bad stuff I said. So thanks for that question. I think a couple things come to mind for us. One is we're now in this time in which climate and culture are becoming important issues for us to consider, and their connection to creating strong educational systems is really becoming much more robust. So one of the first things we would say is to privilege the collection of some data around what's the collaborative climate, what are the sets of interactions that are at play in local LEAs, as a way for them to truly understand the sets of the social capital that exists or doesn't exist in the system, and then using that as a jumping off point. Kara?
I think the other thing I would add is the importance of focusing on leadership development in this area. So we just heard some examples around helping leaders and educators understand the more technical sides of evidence use. But as we talked about in our work, we find that there's both the technical side and the more emotional, relational side. And so a lot of times we found in the districts we're in, they don't really set aside, they might set aside the structure for collaborative work around learning what the evidence means and making decisions about next steps and things like that, but they haven't built, as Alan's suggesting, those climates of trust, and that really takes a leadership role to have the structures aligned with the relationships and the organizational culture and climate. So I think there's a real opportunity through leadership development as an approach from state ed too.
Yeah, and finally on this note, I think the other thing is that we make a lot of assumptions that we say to people, hey, you're all get together and collaborate, and then we walk away, or maybe we stay involved, and we assume that those complex set of skills that are necessary to collaborate, the facilitation, developing reciprocal relationships, allowing vulnerability to take place, are sort of skills that everyone just naturally has. But I think we have to be much more intentional about building capacity and developing those kinds of skills to be able to do this important work, as we heard from many of our colleagues on this panel.
Thanks, Alan and Kara. I'm actually going to turn that same question over to our practitioners in Ohio, and I'm hoping that you all can answer the question as well. I'll repeat it. So what are some examples of policies or practices that you've used as a state education agency to incentivize the use of evidence diffusion and uptake in between the state education agency and the local education agencies in your state?
So certainly, the Struggling Readers Grant is a good example of where we are encouraging the use of evidence-based strategies. And what I would say about that, because that's not unusual, for the Struggling Readers Grant program, but what I will say is one of the things that we did, and I don't know if other states did this or not, but we opened it up to evidence-based use along all 4 tiers of evidence. And so I want to draw particular attention to that last tier, or level 4, which is known in law as the demonstrating a rationale, but we've sometimes referred to as kind of an innovation tier. And so this idea of kind of not just using evidence-based strategies, but also encouraging districts to contribute to the evidence base themselves, and ideally kind of share that information out with their peers. We're pursuing developing peer-to-peer networks so that districts can be working with each other and supporting each other around the use of evidence-based strategies. And there are a number of other areas where we're, of course, specifically tying funds to the use of evidence-based strategies. I'll also note that this past year we started participating as a state in a program called Proving Ground. We have 2 pilot districts working with Proving Ground, and they are working on strategies, developing strategies around reducing chronic absenteeism. And one of the requirements that we put in place for these two districts to participate and for them to receive some incentives to participate was that they serve as model districts or peer districts so that they can help build capacity among their peers for doing this kind of work. So those are a few of the things that we're trying to do, and I think what we're really trying to do is help. We don't want this to just be the state coming out and saying to districts, you have to do this because it's in law, and you need to do it, and you need to check the box and be done. We really want to build up a culture where people start to understand the inherent value of using evidence-based strategies. And while we have a role in that, we also understand that in many ways, districts collaborating amongst each other and being able to develop stronger community partnerships, research partnerships, may be a more effective way to kind of develop that capacity and develop that message. Melissa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, real quick, in thinking about incentivized use of evidence and even uptake, we have another effort that actually is tied to our Striving Readers. That's our State Systemic Improvement Plan, where we have districts involved in not only identifying evidence-based practices, but in learning what those evidence-based practices are. And the uptake that we found is important is that we have included all of the educators that work with young children preschool through grade 3, including their administrators. So when I think about the graphs that Alan and Kara shared, it made me think of these groups of people that we've been working with and how they've been networking with their systems of leaders in order to understand evidence. And because they're seeing things change within their districts, they're actually talking about evidence-based versus research-based, and even using terms more frequently and more appropriately in their conversation.
Thank you so much, Heather and Melissa. So another question from the audience relates to how we're defining evidence. One of our audience members asked whether Ohio, when they were looking for evidence-based practices, whether they only looked in the What Works Clearinghouse or the WWC, and if so, why was that? Could you talk a little bit about why you relied on the What Works Clearinghouse and whether you used other definitions of evidence-based?
Sure, just to clarify, so we have not to date created, at the state level, created a list of evidence-based strategies to give to our districts to say these are the evidence-based strategies that you should be using. That's not to say that that might not happen under certain circumstances in the future, but to date, we have not created any sort of official vetted lists. And we also have not told districts that you can only use the What Works Clearinghouse. Rather, what we have been saying is because of the importance of local context and because it's so important for districts to be able to sit down and really assess what's going to work best for them, we're really encouraging, we want to start at least by giving them the tools to go out and find the evidence-based strategies that are going to work best for them. And those, they may find those through the What Works Clearinghouse, but they don't have to. There are many other clearinghouses that exist out there, and the materials that REL Midwest produced to the crosswalks actually do include several other clearinghouses, top-tier evidence, the blueprints for healthy youth are two of them. There are several more in that document. And we basically said you can use these, just understand that the definitions that are used by those clearinghouses don't align exactly to what ESSA defines for evidence-based strategies. So we're giving you the tool to kind of do that alignment, and you can go out and find, using any clearinghouse you want to use, what's going to work best for your district.
Thanks, Heather. So we are drawing to a close here. we are going to start wrapping up this webinar. Before we conclude today, I wanted to point out a few resources. We invite you to follow us on Twitter and visit our website for resources and news. You can follow us on Twitter at our handle at REL Midwest. And our web address is also listed there. Next slide. In addition, you'll find on this slide all of our email addresses in case you want to follow up with any individual panelists or with the panelists as a collective. We'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today to this webinar. I think this has been a very valuable use of time. We've heard both from researchers who've done some really interesting work using social network analysis. We've heard from people who are out in the field providing coaching and training to state and local education agencies on how to use evidence. And we've also heard from one of the state education agencies in our region about how they are applying evidence within their state and thinking about the use of evidence. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating in this webinar. And I'd also like to encourage all of our attendees to be on the lookout for the slides and the recording of this webinar. We'll be posting both the slides and the recording for anybody who did not get a chance to tune in live today, but would like to view these resources in the future. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.